Hi, it's Roz here from Neural Networks, and I just wanted to take you through how to do the analysis of an EQ report before you move on to the debrief. So I'm just going to quickly run you through that by taking you through a profile. And you can see here we've got profile D and the coach report. So the first thing that we do when we look at an EQ report that we want to analyse is we look at the response style indicators. Here we have a report where we have no sort of issues with the response style or validity indicator as we know it. But you've got their age and gender. You've got the time taken to take the assessment. Usually this is somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes. If it's 6 minutes, it'll flag that they've gone very fast, and you might want to have a look at their answers and results and see whether you feel they may have just rushed through it and not really thought about it, which will obviously negatively impact on their results. We also have the inconsistency index, so we can see if the person has been consistent in the way they responded. This won't flag unless it's a 3 or more. And that's the same with the positive and negative impression scale. If you don't get a 3 or more, it won't flag. Always interesting to have a look at how people have responded to the positive and negative impression index, even if they have a 1. I always like to see which question it is. And yeah, it gives you a bit of an insight into who they might be and how they show up. The last item is item 133, and usually we hope that people answer this with a 5, as has been done here. The majority of time you see this, that someone believes that they were open and honest when they completed the assessment, but every so often you get a 4, where somebody gets to the end and they start to second guess themselves, is that who I really am, or is that just who I want to be? Was I truthful in my responses, or am I deluding myself? So every so often you get that, and that's great to note because then you can have a conversation about it. We then have the omitted items. So if they did skip through and decide not to answer a question or two, you'll see the percentage here. And then we have finally the response distribution. So this is how often they've picked each of the options on the Likert scale. And that can give you a bit of a sense as to whether they've stuck more to the middle of the scoring scale or whether they've pushed out to the extreme ends. So that gives you a bit of an idea too as to what their response style is. Are they somebody who's happy to hit those 1s and 5s, or have they veered away from that? Because either of those will then have an impact on their bar graph. If someone's hitting the 1s and 5s all the time, it's going to be a very high result and maybe overinflated. We don't know till we meet them. But if they then avoid those ends, then we'll see something that's a bit more muted. And once again, we'll have to have a chat with them to understand it more. So then the next thing that you do is you actually look at the bar graph itself. So you consider, where do they fall in the normal range? Are they around that average of 100? Are they above or below? And we can see with this report that the overall EQ is at 107. So this person is sitting around that average, which is good. It's at a good level. Of course, as everybody who's been in one of my certifications knows, way more interested in those subscale interrelationships, way more interested into that interaction between them, not really interested in that overall EQ score. It just gives you a general sense as to where they may be. So looking at this report, we kind of check out to see where are they on the scale. And as we can see, they've got a couple of lower scores, sort of assertiveness there and stress tolerance. And it's always really interesting when you first look at a report and you pick out those sort of potential development areas that we have a look at how did they answer those questions. That's where I always go to first. I pick out those lower subscales and I have a look at how might they have responded. So we go down to the questions in the assessment, and in particular, I was quite interested in assertiveness. So that is on page 10 here. So for this person, they said that they sometimes back down even when they know they're right. So the sometimes, even though it's sitting on the fence, that's going to pull their score back a little bit. They only occasionally say no when they need to. So once again, that's going to pull their score back a bit. They sometimes let people know when they disagree with them. So, certainly a sense there that she might be holding back. And it'd be interesting to understand the sometimes. Like, okay, obviously there's some situations where she can tell people if she disagrees with them, but other situations where she can't. And it'd be good to understand what is it that's different about those situations that makes her make that choice. I tell people what I think. She said occasionally. So that's quite interesting again too. So she's only occasionally telling people what she thinks. Why is she holding back? What kinds of situations does she keep her thoughts to herself? So quite interesting to have a look at that. We also picked out stress tolerance as one of her lower subscales. She believes she often keeps calm in situations, often can think clearly, but there's a sometimes in here once again, sometimes thrives in challenging situations. So, what does that mean to her? What does a challenging situation mean? And in which situations can she thrive and which ones can't she? She only occasionally handles stress without getting too nervous. So, obviously, there's things that she's doing in her work life that she finds stressful and they can make her feel a bit nervous. And then we've got some more of those sometimes responses. I perform well under pressure, sometimes. I cope well with stressful situations, sometimes. I handle upsetting problems well, sometimes. So there's a real sense here for her around in which situations is she more comfortable compared to where it is actually difficult for her to navigate. So interesting that she sat on the fence. And so I'd be sort of making notes for myself around that, around, well, okay, keen to understand the sometimes responses for those subscales and the situations that she finds herself in. So that's always step number one, is to have a look at the answers to those lower subscales to see if they give you any insight. And what I find too is I often then reflect on the patterns that might be happening and see what else I might want to take a look at in this profile. So, I mean, the next step is to get that sense of what is this profile telling me about this individual? And you can just run your eye through the subscales. Okay, confidence is on the average. Obviously, she's got much higher scores. So I will want to go and check how she's answered those questions under self-regard and to understand how that might be playing out for her. But great in terms of her drive, fantastic emotional self-awareness, lovely emotional expression to match that. So this is the winning combination for a debrief. You've got someone who's high emotional self-awareness, high emotional expression. Yes, you've scored. They're going to sit there and they're going to let you know exactly what they feel is going on for them. They're going to open up to you more than likely. The assertiveness we've already looked at. We can see the independence is sort of on the average, but wow, look at that empathy. Really high, right? So I don't know what's crossing your mind, but in the certification, we talk about some of the classic combinations. And so we see here the high empathy and we go, okay, well, how does that match up with the assertiveness? Is she able to have performance conversations with people? Is she able to tell people what she feels about how they're performing and give them an opportunity to improve? Can she coach them? And we saw in the assertiveness questions that, she occasionally tells people what she thinks. So interesting to see for a leader, how is she able to hold her staff accountable and to open those courageous conversations? I mean, that would be a really interesting point to sort of open up with her, that imbalance between the empathy and the assertiveness, what's going on for her there. We see good results in decision making. So you can say, okay, on the average for problem solving, she still might have a few questions around that because it is lower than some of her other scores, but good reality testing, quite objective. The impulse controls at a good level too, so likely to be quite considered and self-assured. Great to know that. Flexibility, however, is just on the average, which is not bad, but it's lower than quite a few of other scores and certainly out of balance with that impulse control. Is she so self-contained that she's unable to sort of adapt and be flexible as required? And then once again, how does that play into her opening conversations with people? If she's already feeling uncomfortable, and she's not necessarily adaptive, is that sort of a real weak point for her? I'm hoping you can see how I'm making these thoughts and queries as we go down the profile page. So based on having gone down that profile page and sort of, we've already looked at stress tolerance and we can see that optimism is high, I'm now going, oh, okay, I want to go back and look at self-regard. I want to go back and have a look at problem solving and I want to understand that flexibility. So let's have a look at those answers to those questions. Like I said, they're not bad results, but they're just lower than some of our others. So what is it in her self-regard? Sometimes respects herself, but she often feels good about herself, occasionally lacks self-confidence. So it'd be like that's the combination of avoiding the ends and then that sometimes response is kind of holding her there. Okay, the next one I wanted to look at was problem solving. Okay, it's when emotions are involved. We can see that here. When I'm really upset, I can't decide what to do sometimes. hard for me to decide on the best solution when solving a problem? Sometimes. And I let my emotions get in the way when making decisions sometimes. So if things are highly emotive for her or there's a lot of choice, they may be the situations that she's less likely to be able to navigate. Be once again interesting to open. If she wants to talk about her problem solving, be great to sort of dive into, well, tell me the different situations and how you respond differently in those situations. And then I was also interested in flexibility because it is so much lower than the impulse control. And we know that that's a bit of a classic matchup. So flexibility, let's have a look. Occasionally difficult to change your opinion. Okay. Often do not like being in unfamiliar situations. Often feel uneasy with last minute changes. Sometimes needs things to be predictable. So yeah, really a sense of predictability there, but then also being, not really enjoying those unfamiliar situations. So, interpersonal relationships is on the average, but with really high empathy. It could be somebody who is, less gregarious, less sort of outgoing. And yes, it's the unfamiliar situations would not be her go-to, but she certainly cares about people and certainly understands them, and she understands herself. So let's see how that plays out when we sit down and chat to her. So that's sort of the key things that I do when I prepare for a debrief. I always look at those validity indicators. I always look at how they answer the questions, particularly for the lower subscales. I run my eye down the page to have a look at where are the combinations that might play into each other. You have at your disposal the subscale combinations document that's in the resource folder. So you can always check on that to see are there any of the classic patterns. And then, yeah, just dive in a little bit more and start making some assumptions, I guess, which I usually write as questions. And then you can use those questions in the debrief when needed. Obviously, we start the debrief by asking the person what they see and we go where they want to go. But generally, there always sort of comes a time where they might be open to you exploring some of the questions that you've noted. Now, also wanted to mention the balancing your EI section. I find it particularly helpful when you've found a couple of subscales that you're interested in. For example, with this profile, assertiveness is one. So I'll go to the page which has assertiveness and I'll have a look at the text that's written here in terms of the imbalances. So in this case, her emotional self-awareness is much higher than her assertiveness. So suggesting that she could use that emotional information to guide her assertiveness. So when she has strong feelings about something, be more inclined to behave assertively. And when she feels less strongly, she can back off. So sort of encouraging her to use her emotional self-awareness to help build her assertiveness. So that's something that I'd note down for myself. And also what I already raised, that assertiveness being lower than the empathy. So, greater emphasis on caring for others rather than putting her viewpoint across. So I think that would naturally come up as part of the conversation looking at that profile. So the other one that was straight off the bat that I looked at was stress tolerance, so that we can look here for that. And look, there's three. So stress tolerance is lower than problem solving, lower than flexibility, and lower than interpersonal relationships. So you can read through that text and sort of make a note for yourself as to whether there's anything there that you can sort of craft into a question to help you during the debrief. Okay. So that's how I prepare for a debrief. And nowadays I tend to just scribble on the bar graph, drawing lines between the subscales and then scribbling my questions across there. But up to you as to how you do it. Just wanted to take you through that process. Any questions, of course, drop me an email and I'll be more than happy to chat.